I'm happy to be here. We're here waiting for the phone to ring.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer and educator, and each week I have the good fortune to speak with and share the stories and wisdom of musicians and teachers in the band community. I'm thrilled to announce a new partnership between the Everything Band podcast and Kaleidoscope Adventures, a full-service tour company specializing in student group travel. The Everything Band podcast is a proud member of the Music Teachers Development Podcast Network. The Muted Network provides support in the form of audio on-demand programming designed by and for music educators. You can find more information about our network at mutedpodcasts.com. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for listening. I appreciate your time and hope that you are finding value from these interviews. I rely on word of mouth and social media to bring the show to new listeners. If you think you know one or two people who might find these interviews useful, please let them know about it. You can also help by following me and sharing posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Remember, help your students live up to the best that is in them through music. And now, on to my next guest, Jonathan Newman. Hi, Jonathan.
Hi, Mark.
How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you.
Can you introduce yourself and tell the listeners what you do, where you are?
I am Jonathan Newman. I am a composer. I currently live in Winchester, Virginia, where I have a teaching position at Shenandoah Conservatory. But I've been here for, this is my fifth year. And before that, I was briefly in the Pacific Northwest in Portland, Oregon, but then really for the bulk of my career, I was in New York City.
What's your origin story? How did you get into music as a child? Did you have a musical family, et cetera, those kind of things?
Well, there's been much discussion about this in my family about who exactly are the musical ones. And I have very supportive parents. Who supported my interest in music from the time I was banging away at the piano as a kid, begging for piano lessons, and it was just a very normal experience. I think in the 70s and 80s, where I took piano lessons, I played trombone quite seriously in middle school and high school, and played in bands, in jazz band and orchestras, and did the whole like regional, state band and orchestra stuff. Was squad leader in my marching band. It was all very normal. I sang in choruses. I, was always not always, but the lead in the school musical. That kind of stuff. I had my hand in everything that was, I could get my hands on musically. Pretty much took advantage of everything that I could musically as a young music student in northeastern Pennsylvania at that time. And then started my, very specific training in composition in high school. I think I was always writing things. I just didn't know what I was doing. I didn't realize that I was writing. So I wrote little piano pieces for myself, even when I was young, very young. And I started writing for, my friends in the trombone section. I started writing for my chorus, for my high school band, for, things like that throughout high school until I, was looking for what I was going to study in college. And I knew it was music, but I didn't quite know in what form until I sort of had an epiphany and realized that I could study composition, and that would pretty much encompass everything that I was already doing. And so I did that, and so it was a very specific training pretty early on. From the time I was pretty much 17, I just went straight through from a youth program at Tanglewood through college, master's, and started started a career.
I want to talk about this, your trombone experiences and your experiences in band as a middle school and high school student. How do you think that shaped you in your career today, that band experience?
I think it was an enormous shape, especially trombone, because trombone is sort of an egalitarian instrument, right? It allowed me to play and learn all different styles, not just band, but I got even young, some orchestral literature. I could play jazz. I could play in jazz combos. I could play in jazz band. In fact, the first theory I ever learned really was jazz theory. That was how I came up. I was mostly interested in jazz through the trombone. And I think because that instrument allowed for those different styles and kinds of music for me to be exposed to it early on, that definitely had a big impact on my writing. And band specifically is interesting because in high school, obviously band was the main currency of music making, band and chorus, as it is for most of the country, and less so orchestra, which existed, but was a pale in that particular school and in that particular region, was a sort of a pale version. But when I went to study in college and beyond and graduate school, band suddenly goes away, or at least where I studied, right? Like really went away, disappeared, right? Literally did not have one, or at least I think at Juilliard that it existed for one concert in the spring. And everybody would complain about being assigned to it, and I think now it's a little more codified. They might actually have an ensemble that plays a little more, but it just didn't. It wasn't an option, right? So it goes away, and that was actually interesting because it allowed me to sort of concentrate on learning music, common practice music and music of the 20th century, and, basically do what a composer needs to do and study Stravinsky. Right. And so it opened up the space for me to do that, get everything else in there and study everything else for a full 6 years. And it was only after, years after graduate school, that when I started writing some wind ensemble pieces, that it all started. The world had become unfamiliar to me, because in that space of time I had spent so much of my energy in orchestral and chamber music that it had become unfamiliar. So it was almost like, but over time I sort of would remember my, especially when I started doing more educational pieces, I started, drawing on my early experiences with band. And, I could picture myself, sitting there in the trombone section, which really helped, it really has helped me envision educational pieces for young ensembles.
Yeah, we had a little bit of a conversation about this. I had a similar experience. When I got my composition degrees, I had the same thing. I went away from band for years and years and years, and coming back to it, it's very different to write chamber music and orchestral music than it is to write in the band community.
Yeah, well, I found the more I've done this, that every genre or even on instrumentation has its own kind of world, so there, the most extreme versions of that are I think band and chorus, the choral world, and those are the ones where people can really get I mean, pigeonholed is the word, but whether by choice or not, right? I write band music, I write choral music, or be known in that community, and it sort of becomes this, recursive loop. But there are others, like even percussion music is kind of like that, and they where there's a whole swath of composers who write for percussion. Right. Many of them percussionists because they know what they're doing, at least technically. And it creates a little less room, for others. But they all have their own worlds. And even to some extent, the orchestral world and the professional orchestral world is its own kind of there's probably a Venn diagram,
right?
Where, these things definitely overlap. But if in the Venn diagram, the band and chorus would definitely be more on the outside.
I would agree with that. It's interesting because I wrote a flute choir piece a few years ago. And as I was writing that, and you dig into the flute choir music, you see the same thing. It's the same names keep popping up.
Yeah, exactly. Flute music specifically, I would say, even of the winds, is got its own thing going on.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. There's when we talk about composers, and I know that you've been on Garrett Hope's show, the Portfolio Composer.
Yes,
and he talks about that a lot, about the idea of sort of doing one thing really well. And we see that. We have composers who are known to be writing, band composers or orchestral composers. And it's really the special composers who can sort of bridge those worlds and live in multiple worlds, I think, to me.
Well, I appreciate that because I try to do that. I don't know if I'm in that category, but I certainly I try not to think about it too much. I just do what makes me most comfortable. I have personally very less interest in writing for one genre just because I would find it tedious, right? And it's not just tedious, but also artistically less interesting. Because I would like to try different things, and I would like to think that I know a lot about different kinds of music and different kinds of genres. So I would like to explore. I like to explore those things. So I actually have gotten to the point where I try and spread these things out, like even just writing two works of the same genre. I don't know if genre is the right word, but you know what I mean? Instrumentation next to each other I have trouble. Like I would, if that happens, I try and make them have served completely different functions, or they're completely different sizes, or they're, completely different kinds of pieces. And if it's not like just on the writing schedule, if for some reason that has to happen, I will I'll have to force something else in between or some other things in between just because I can't, almost like a palate cleanser.
It's interesting that you say that. I think about my own experiences with that. I write almost all band music now, but I take long breaks in between pieces that I used to not take.
Right.
And I wonder if that's maybe that defense mechanism.
I'm sure it serves the same function. I mean, I had, one of my cherished teachers used to say, I mean, you can't just go from writing one thing to the next. You need time to do things. You have to read a book or take a trip or go to a museum. I mean, otherwise you have nothing to write about.
This is true. That's really good advice. So let's talk about Cherished Teachers a little bit, and we'll talk about your composition. Again, we're going to go back to your university experience because I know you have some special experiences there. But I want to know about, do you have anything from your high school or middle school band teachers that you still value and still carry with you as far as wisdom?
Well, I had a very supportive band teacher who's now retired, and occasionally I still keep in touch, but he just allowed me to, I think he recognized that I had an interest in a sort of an overall interest in music, and that I wasn't just, that I wasn't just there to fill a seat. And he would create opportunities for me and invite me to play in, everything that I could possibly do. And, if there was an AP theory class, I was one of the 3 kids who took it. I think I took advantage of everything he would throw at me. So I think if anything, he would create those opportunities for me. Like he recognized, and I'm thankful for that. He recognized that I had an interest and then allowed me to explore it by at least seeing it and acknowledging that I had it. Right. And it's very easy to I'm not, that kind of an educator. And to be able to do that is an enormous blessing that I would never be able to fulfill as well as others. And so I could imagine that may not always be the case. Like it could easily be where you just don't even notice, or you're too busy, or you've got too many kids. It's just too much to notice the ones who truly are interested and need to be thrown every opportunity, need to be, given the chance to explore. And he did that for me, definitely.
So Jonathan, I want to talk about your, you went to Boston University as an undergraduate?
I did.
And so not much band going on there, but you had Tanglewood and the whole experience of being at a fine music school like that. But I think most people know you because you went to Juilliard at the same time as Eric Whitacre and John Mackey and Stephen Bryant. And I know that
and others and
many others at the time. But I mean, in our community, that's what
Right. Correct. Yeah.
And the reason I bring this up is because, it's become a little bit apocryphal that your session at Midwest a few years ago where the line went around the McCormick Center and not everyone got in. And so
I've been wondering exactly recently, because I had to this is nothing to do with anything, but I'm up for contract renewal, right where I teach, and so you have to make a portfolio and everything, and I put in the portfolio that I did that, and I was trying to find the amount of people who actually attended the session, and I couldn't. I found some crazy number that couldn't possibly be true,
right?
Because I was trying to visualize the room. Like it wasn't that big, I don't think.
They didn't have you in a big enough room, that's for
sure. Yeah.
Well, it was really funny. I did not go to your session, but I did walk down to try to go to your session. And I came down the escalator and I saw the line, and I promptly went back up the escalator, and I said, I'll catch up with those guys another time.
Yeah.
So I guess I don't want to do that. I don't know if I'm presenting this right, but I guess I wanted to talk to you about the BCM experience and being around those composers and how that sort of shaped your notion of how you compose for band or for other ensembles, because I think that's a pretty important thing, and you guys did something pretty important for the band community in those days.
Oh, I appreciate that. Well, how it shaped me musically, interesting question. At the time, what it really was the 4 of us. It was sort of a means to an end. We were very good friends, and it was a means to sort of, find opportunities to be together, and a way to promote our stuff in a sort of synergistic, in that business buzzword way. But I think that's actually the definition of synergy, right? Where one thing helps the other thing, which helps the other thing, which helps the other thing, right? And sort of promote the stuff together. Initially, it was simply as a way for us to have a booth at Midwest. right? And so it started as we had to, had to come up with something so that we could share a booth and just go in on it, because none of us could afford just doing it on our own. And as far as what we try to do, I don't think there was never really a mission to do anything other than just make our own music the way we wanted to. It just was for, it was for wind ensembles, and bands, which seemed to have, a let's say missing. There was a need, right? We saw a need, and where the need being composers who wanted to write as creatively as they wanted to. And feel fewer restrictions and use our skill and craft in order to create works that were accessible to amateur players, but also as creative as we could envision them. And I think all of us did that in different ways, which was interesting. And I think that was what's interesting is that sometimes we would get lumped together as sort of one sound, which was very much not the case, I thought. I thought we were all very, very different. But that kind of thing happens. So that's the danger of grouping together like that, of promoting your stuff together, is that you sort of, if somebody is not a fan of one particular composer in the group, then it leaks into the others. But then the reverse, if somebody is a fan of somebody in the group, then that might leak to the others in the group, and you get the benefit of that. So it was, the benefit definitely outweighed the risks. Definitely there, and this still happens today, although everybody's much busier and we all have kids and, other things going on. But it was also a way for us to sort of share in the experience. We would write pieces, we would talk about them, we would send each other drafts, we send each other mock-ups and talk about our experiences. And it was almost like a group, constant group therapy.
Mm-hmm. Actually, it's kind of like almost like a composition seminar of the four of you.
Yeah.
Just kind of bouncing ideas off of each other. So I want to ask you about that initial booth that formed the consortium. Did someone have a piece getting played, or were you just aware that Midwest was something you needed to do?
I wasn't aware of Midwest at all until I wrote a piece for UNLV in Las Vegas that Eric Whitaker helped arrange, because he went there and knew Tom Leslie, the director, and helped set it up. And that was because, Eric came to Juilliard sort of proselytizing for winds in a way. He had already had one major work, Ghost Train, that was getting played a lot, and he would talk to us and say, "Listen, this is great. They need new music. They love new music. They rehearse it all year long. They do multiple performances. They have commission money. Y'all should be doing this." I know I was always resistant until finally, I think I sent him a piece that I had done in Aspen for a chamber group. It was a sextet, and I sent it to him. This is a piece I wrote this summer or something, and he was like, "This is it. This is the piece that you could make into a band piece." And I was like, "Okay, sure, let's try it." And I transcribed it for bands. That became my first band piece. It was only after that piece, and I had the experience of hearing this giant ensemble with 7 percussionists play this thing, and it sounded like spun gold. That I was like, okay, I can I could do this again. It was only after that people started saying, well, you're going to Midwest. And I said, what's that? And so I went that next, that year.
So after that first experience of having OK Feel Good kind of come out and hearing that, what was that like? I mean, those were sort of like, I guess I equate it to almost like the 50s and the 60s when band music had all this sort of rush of influx of different kinds of sounds into it at the time. I mean, what was that like those days writing those pieces?
The experience. It was, well, look, here's what I can say. When we first had the booth, and even for the first few years, right, that was it. Like we were 4 composers who were, I mean, we were the only ones, right? There wasn't anybody else. There were previously established composers, and there were established composers of educational music already, obviously. But doing what we were doing, we were kind of it. So it felt, I guess that's why it sort of felt new, because presenting what I think was sort of a different kind of sounding music in general, to wind ensembles, seemed kind of new at the time. I mean, now it didn't take that long, maybe 10 years or so, for us to not be the only ones. And that's a good thing, right? Now there's a lot more choices for conductors and educators to find interesting, engaging music for winds, of not just, thankfully now it's still a lot of way to go, but thankfully not just of white guys as well. There's a lot more choice. And if I don't know if we were the beginning of that, but I hope that maybe we had a small part in it.
Yeah, I guess it's just interesting because, when we think about that, right around 2000, we have the internet kind of beginning to burgeon, and we have people starting to make their mark without the gatekeepers that we often think of. And you guys were on the cutting edge of that. I think that's an important place.
Oh, I guess that's true. I didn't think of that. Yeah, we were all essentially self-published. Mm-hmm. And for the most part, we have pretty much eschewed that the whole time and continue to. And that was new as well.
Yeah. So what's the hardest thing about being self-published, have you found?
Well, there's a lot more work involved.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a time element. And it used to be, it's almost like having an extra job, it's not almost, it is having an extra job. You could easily spend your whole day just doing stuff that helped the business continue rather than writing. And I think all of us, to some extent, it didn't take that long. I mean, in a matter of years wise, for us all eventually to sort of hire that out. So there's that element. I guess I've never found traditional publishing, and I had my experience with it is colored by a very formative job that I had writing, a job that I had at Boosey and Hawkes early on after grad school. And so I got to see traditional publishing, hands-on from inside the building for about 3 years. And that really helped. It helped me see what worked in traditional publishing, what doesn't work, how it goes. And it helped, it taught me lessons that I sort of took with me to my own publishing business.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like I spent a summer as an orchestral librarian for a music festival.
Yeah, exactly.
And that taught me a
Yeah.
lot about like part preparation and what's expected of a professional looking part, and what kinds of markings you need, and it kind of really professionalized my composing.
A similar experience.
Yeah. I mean, those kind of things, those are really important for composers and musicians to experience that part of the business. I think that's a really interesting. Is there anything in particular specific that you learned from that you'd want to share?
Traditional publishers are very slow, right? They move very, very slowly. So I think what people can appreciate from working with a self-published composer is the speed with which things can happen. I mean, especially when, in the case of, I'm lucky to be working with Sarah Meals, who it moves so quickly. You could, within one day, request your parts and everything could be done, right? This is not the case in traditional publishing, right? It moves it's like a steamship that trying to turn around. Just that, learning how the time differences. I learned a lot about how perusal scores would, are the essential, the essentials of promotion materials, like just making available to the people who can perform, the decision makers, making available all the information that's necessary in order to make a programming decision. You would be surprised. I am still continually just surprised at composers who do not make all of that information available, which makes it so that the decision makers, about the programming decision makers, actually cannot make a decision about your music, right? So the things that are, and it's very simple things that, they need to know how long is the piece, what is the piece, what are the forces, what is this, can I see a score and can I hear it, right? And how do I procure it? And if all of those things are available, then programmers can make their decision. And if any one element of that is not available or requires extra steps of emailing somebody, then that means they can't. In traditional publishing, usually those things are 75% there. It depends on the kind of music that you're talking about, but a traditional publisher will definitely tell you what it's for and how long it is, and how to procure it. They won't necessarily tell you how much it is, and that you might not be able to see a score right away. Although that's gotten a lot better, depending on the kind of piece it is. And you might not be able to hear it right away. There is definitely a method for doing that, but there are different levels of obtuseness to that method. But I learned about how professional music is put together, how it looks, how, as you say, working with the rental library, I've learned to understand how rental materials went out, how they worked. I was also part of mixed into this experience. I supported myself after graduate school by being a copyist for 10 years, which is sort of a dying art. For a variety of reasons, but at the time I was a very serious copyist in New York and had a lot of work, and I learned a lot from that as well, and that sort of mixed into that experience because I was doing that while I was at Boosey and after and for Boosey, and so learning about the production of performance materials was an essential part of my being able to self-publish, because it just felt natural. I just was always in control of performance materials. I had spent some time promoting pieces, and so it seemed silly to do anything otherwise. It never even really it never really felt like an option to. I just saw all of the downsides. It's like, why would I let somebody else who doesn't know as much as me control the material, do it more slowly, and take 90%?
All right. So I just want to ask you a little bit about, even though we've been talking for a while, I want to talk about this idea of popular styles and jazz that runs through your music. You know, one of my favorite piece by you, and I'll just be blunt about it, is Blow It Up, Start Again.
They'll probably play that one at my funeral.
Oh, no.
Yeah, dubstep. Well, so I have a compositional interest in style, and that is, you know, there's a baseline of thinking about music as notes and rhythms, and, you know, maybe some articulations and dynamics, and there you go, you're done. You know, and I tend to think of it as a much larger palette of material. There's notes and rhythms and dynamics and articulations, but there's also you know, texture and color and form and style being one of these elements on this particular, you know, wheel. And they're all equal to each other. And you can think about them compositionally in ways where you could create pieces, and notes, like what notes fill in the gaps aren't really the most important part. You know, other things are the most important part. So I tend to do this. I think about different styles and incorporating them compositionally into as sort of compositional elements, and manipulating them in a writing way, much like I would manipulate a motive or a particular harmony or gesture. And that interests me greatly, to the point where I think about that and do it in nearly every piece. It's not every piece, but nearly every piece. And a lot of times these end up being, I think about a particular specific style that I might be interested in exploring, musical style. It's usually vernacular, but it doesn't have to be, you know. And it could be anything from a composer's name to a particular, you know, vernacular style, like, say, dubstep. For that piece in particular, the commissioner was actually interested in incorporating some elements of, like, electronica in the piece, and of course it's not my exact, you know, daily dose of music. So I, you know, started looking where I was thinking about I started asking around and floating some ideas, and it was others who were like, you know, listen, if you're really interested in this stuff, what's happening right now, and this will date when this was happening, right? It's dubstep. And I, you know, was like, dub what? Yeah. And so I, you know, took myself to school, and by the end of it, you know, I'm sitting there listening to Skrillex, like transcribing it, figuring out how it works and what makes it sound like it does. You know, I also sort of incorporated funk into that piece as a sort of a style element, and thought that was a good idea for a piece to sort of mix the two. And so there's actually sort of, and that's actually that piece is a good example of how I do that in a compositional way of like moving styles around, sort of like building blocks. I feel very free stylistically. Like it's the old saw of there's good music, there's bad music. There's just because it's for an orchestra doesn't mean that it's good. And just because it's, for guitar, bass, and drums means it's bad. So there's just, it's all level. It's all good to you. And it's all available to me. Stravinsky is available to me. Telemann is available to me. Bach is available to me. So is Chinese opera. So is Parliament Funkadelic. So is Beck. So is whatever I can think of. And it's all good. Like it's all usable stuff. And you can get some interesting, I just like the idea of sort of flattening the world of music. And I think it actually speaks to, the non-pigeonholing that the pigeonholing that I fight against. I just don't like, it doesn't interest me to do one thing. Like I like everything. It's all just one big happy musical world. Right. And why should there be a difference between what we play in the concert hall and what we listen to in our car? And so sort of bridging that gap has been sort of an artistic goal that I just try and, that it doesn't bother me, but I'm aware that, a player could play their, go to rehearsal and play music, rehearse music for a concert, and then go to their car and listen to something, completely different. Listen to Prince, right? Well, if the elements of Prince were involved more into the music that they were playing, maybe they would have more interest in playing it. I like the idea of mixing everything up.
So, Jonathan, how about this new work that you wrote for the Florida State Wind Symphony?
Yeah, it's called Ilani and Olauan. I'm really quite pleased with it. I'm very proud of it. It took a good long time to write. It took a good long time for it to actually happen, but quite a while to write. I would say about a year and a half. It's the idea behind it was. Well, I was very pleased to do it because I have a relationship with Florida State that I'm very happy about. I'm very close friends with Rick Clary, who does the wind orchestra, and he's been such a wonderful supporter of my stuff. And when they've always played everything that I wrote and played it brilliantly, but we've never actually done. I've never actually done a piece for them specifically. And so it was time to do that. I was thrilled to just do that. And so because of my relationship with FSU, I wanted to just make something special. So I thought a lot about it and came up with this idea of making a sort of a Stravinsky and Ravellian ballet suite, or about, a sort of 20th century ballet score to a ballet that never existed. As if, we play Daphnis and Chloe, we play Firebird, and they become sort of cherished pieces of the concert hall. We don't think so much about the ballets themselves anymore, right? Or Miraculous Mandarin or something like that, right? We know that they were ballets, but there's only a handful of these things that are still actually performed as ballets, Swan Lake or something like that. And even Rite of Spring, right? And so I thought about this, and I liked the idea of like creating one of these pieces as if it was a ballet at one point, and now it's a concert piece. and sort of making this ballet score to something that wasn't. And then I learned, I figured out that, a lot of these, if you actually read the scenarios of these ballets, they're just absolutely crazy pants. They're like, they're these outlandish, fantastic scenarios. And that was very attractive to me. So I had in mind a collaborator for that, a playwright who I knew from New York, who would be perfect for it. And so Gary Winter. And so Gary wrote me this terrific scenario. He was very interested in this Hawaiian story of Ilani and Ko'olau, and which I hesitated because obviously I have not just very little connection to Hawaii, no connection to Hawaii. But I decided that ultimately the story was so good. And I, it didn't seem to matter. It didn't matter to me too much who was telling the story. I just felt it needed to, I wanted to do something musically with it. So it's a giant, it's a giant piece, 45 minutes long. It's 8 scenes. Many of them are connected to each other, and it's, I'm very, composition, artistically, I'm very, very pleased with it. And it got a nice, big, splashy premiere last month. And I was actually just working on the corrections to the score yesterday. It's a monster. I've never written anything so big.
All right, Jonathan, we should get on to these final questions. I really appreciate your time. I've had a great time talking to you.
Sure.
All right, so let's talk about these questions I ask everybody. And the first one is, where do you draw the line between healthy and unhealthy competition in music?
There's going to be competition no matter what, just for, if there is a soloist needed for a piece and 2 people want it, I mean, just inherently there will be competition, right? So that's the sort of natural competition that helps people, I think, improve, get better. There's sometimes a little too much imposed competition, I would say, that I have less interest in being part of. But I understand it. But as far as performances of ensembles, sometimes that can go too far. The kind of just in the idea that something is not worth doing unless you get a medal at it. It sort of rubs me the wrong way sometimes. So that I would call the unhealthy version of it. But I mean, there's always good, I compete with composers for commissions, for certainly for teaching jobs, you do. And, all that feels natural, and competitions and things like that. Those are, it's just the standard stuff. Nobody loves it. Nobody likes it, but you sort of have to learn how to deal with it. So there's so much of that anyway. There's so much of the competition that just happens by the very nature of how music works, that the addition of extra competition on top of it feels unnecessary.
Being a musician can be pretty busy. Being a teacher can be pretty busy. How have you found a work-life balance in your career? Or have you?
Well, Mark, I'm not sure I have. I struggle with it. I struggle with it. Just ask my wife after writing this ballet, right? It's, I did better at it when I was a freelance composer for 20 years. And now with a full-time teaching job, it is significantly more difficult. I feel like I have 3 full-time jobs now, and it's and I pretty much suck at 2 of them at any one given time, so it's just a question of choosing which one I suck at the time, so hopefully you can be bad. I could be bad at one of them or one or two of them for a while, and until they start to notice, and then I can, switch. And that's basically how I've been managing for the last 4 years. But it is very, very difficult because composers need, time, and not just an inordinate amount of time, not just the time of writing. Like it goes beyond the time of just sitting down and actually writing. There's that time. And then there's a whole separate element of the time of not writing, right? The time of thinking, the time of taking a walk, the time of where you're, for me, like, riding a bike and not like letting my brain go dead, that is actually part of a necessary part of writing. And then there's the time of, doing things that sort of fill your soul, that fill you artistically, reading and seeing a play or a movie or something like that, right? And that's time that is involved in composition, and you need all of it, and so it's very time intensive, and even beyond the actual act of writing. So yeah, it is a struggle. I don't have any. I wish I could have words of advice, except to just learn how to say no.
Yeah, that's an important one.
That's one of the hardest things to learn.
All right, Jonathan, this is a big question, and everyone has a different view on this depending on their place in the community. But what are the challenges facing music education or band or just music in general, and how can we best meet them?
Honestly, I think it's what I was talking about before with style. Style, I found, because of my particular interest in it, is not taught as either at all or not as well as I think it could be to prepare young musicians for sort of 21st century view of music. That F that a music student might play in one piece is not the same F that they might play in another piece. And teaching the difference in style, I think, is an important part of music education that I think either gets short shrift or literally ignored. And I wish that, it's probably a selfish wish, because if students and musicians in general had more of a facility with different styles, then they'd be able to play my music with more ease. Right? So it comes from that, sort of a frustration of just a lack of facility with certain styles, which come naturally to me, or at least I'm interested in them, so I have more, I can feel how they work better. Whereas then those things have to be taught in the moment, and they can sometimes be unnatural. So I'm not sure if I made myself, if I was clear in that answer, but that's pretty much something about music education that I wish and now that I am a music educator, I do that. Right. But obviously at the college level, I think if it happened at an earlier level, it might be better for everybody.
How would you recommend that we teach it better? How do we give students the tools to explore style? Well,
I mean, certainly a trained educator would have a better idea of how to do this than me. But I mean, just creating an awareness for students that, that if they're playing a Rossini overture, right, that is played differently than if they're playing Bach. And just the fact that, or some sort of jazz inspired tune, right? And just the fact that they're in tune and are playing together isn't enough, right? Or playing the right notes. That so how you would do it, I don't know, you probably expose them to you'd expose them to different examples of that style. You would talk about, there would be just some discussion, or have the students sort of try and figure out what the elements of the style are, sort of codify them into like actually, lists of like what makes this style, why do we recognize it as Rossini, or Mozart, or and what they're hearing, like just to use their ears, like what they hear when they hear recordings of other pieces in that style, and then try and incorporate that into the playing. It seems like the way to go, but I mean, obviously, a trained educator would have a better idea of different methods.
Jonathan, if I can give you a time machine and set it to the day of your high school graduation, what would you tell yourself?
It's funny. I would probably tell myself to not get too wrapped up in perfection and to write more. Write as much chamber music as I can. Write for my friends. Get pieces out there. Don't worry about getting, the larger opportunities. I would tell myself to probably not worry too much. I tended to worry and get wrapped up in perfection and feeling like I wasn't ready or not. Yeah, that's the kind of thing. I think that's what I would probably say.
I 100% empathize with you. Completely understand that. How many pieces I've stopped because I didn't like them. Oof.
Yeah, and or didn't follow through on an opportunity to write someone because I thought, I'm just not, I don't think I'm ready to write for that. Or
Yep.
And you know what? Now, if I went back, I would say, of course I was.
Yep, absolutely. That's a hard-earned lesson, though, boy.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, Jonathan. So this is an interesting question for a lot of my listeners, and it's if you could plan it out, what would be the final work that you'd like to conduct or hear or play, and why?
I don't know. I mean, I would probably be, there are some pieces that are so ingrained inside me that I don't need to listen to them. I would just I just have to think about them. And there's sort of my desert island pieces where I get almost nearly the same enjoyment out of just thinking about the piece as I do listening to it. And so I actually rarely listen to them because they're already inside me. Do you know what I mean? So it would probably be one of those. And, so maybe something, probably a piece by Benjamin Britten or so. I'm a big Britten head. So it's probably something like the War Requiem or Peter Grimes or something like that. Just a piece that just means a lot to me. And I would just sort of hear it for the last time. I mean, if I only had, 5 minutes, it would probably be some Bach chorale, it would be like, Komm, süsser or something like that. And, and that might do me, I mean, I could also be, somebody said that they would play the final trio from the last act of Rosenkavalier. I wouldn't say no to that either,
All right, Jonathan, is there anything coming up that you'd like to share or promote?
That's just where I get to log roll.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I mean, obviously, I'm very excited about the ballet, and I'd like people to know about it. I wrote a piece that hasn't really been, that's not done, that's not out in the world yet. It's done, but there's still some little things to do with it. That's actually it's for high school. Since this audience, I'm assuming it's for high school band and silent film.
Oh, cool.
I'm pretty excited. I think it turned out really, really well. And I just have, only a few more things to take care of logistically with it before it goes out there in the world. And then I think it will be an available thing. It uses a Mary Pickford silent film. And
that's cool.
It's called Tender Hearts. So, we'll be on the lookout for that, and I think that would be the next thing that would be probably the most widely accessible piece of mine, at least for band. Yeah.
You know what I didn't ask you that I should have is, if someone who's listening doesn't know your music, what piece would you point them to know you?
Oh, I will answer that question. I also should mention, there's another piece that I wrote. There was a bunch of band pieces that kind of happened in a row that are still just started because they were all chunked together. They all kind of, they're getting short shrift. There's a piece called Novel Romance that I really, I think works pretty well as well, and that I wrote last year or over several years, but it came out last year. And that one people can check out as well. What piece of mine would they start with?
Yeah. If you could direct them and say,
composer's always like the last thing that they wrote.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I get that a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. So, if you have 45 minutes, you could listen to the ballet, but I'm very pleased with the things that I've done in the last few years. I think obviously Blow It Up, Start Again that's easy to listen to. It's 4 minutes long. Doesn't take up much of your time. Listening to My Mass, I'm very, very proud of that. That piece is, that's a 40-minute piece. That's another, a time commitment. And I have, chamber music I'm very pleased with. I have a brass quintet that I'm proud of, and that's pretty recent, called Prayers of Steel, and I have a viola sonata that gets done quite a lot that I'm very pleased with, called Deep Sky Blue. So, I think if you just look, if you go on the website and just click around, and the website's just my name, and you look at the things that are recent, I think there might be something there that, because there's a mixture of stuff, there might be something there that you might be interested in.
Excellent. So, Jonathan, how can people get in touch with you? You mentioned Sarah earlier. Do you have contact info?
If you Google Jonathan Newman, I believe that my website might be the first thing that comes up. So, you would just go to the website, and you can write music at jonathannewman.com, and any inquiries will be addressed very, very quickly.
Excellent. Jonathan, thank you so much for your time.